Moving into this neighborhood was supposed to be a fresh start for my sister and me. After years of battling an illness that left her wheelchair-bound, she had fought her way to the top and was now a feared and respected state governor. She was known for being tough, for standing her ground, and for never backing down from a challenge. Despite her physical limitations, she never let anything stop her, and I admired her resilience more than words could express. So when we moved into what was supposed to be a peaceful, welcoming community, we never expected that the biggest fight of our lives would come from something as petty and cruel as an HOA. For the first few weeks, everything seemed fine. Our neighbors were polite, though some seemed a little too nosy for my liking. My sister's wheelchair ramp had been professionally installed, fully compliant with ADA guidelines and safety codes. It wasn't some ugly, rickety structure. It was well-designed, sleek, and blended perfectly with the house. But then the letters started coming. The HOA's first attack, the letters. At first, they were worded politely, disguised as friendly reminders about the community's architectural guidelines. But as time went on, the letters became increasingly aggressive. They claimed the ramp was an unapproved exterior structure and that it violated the uniform aesthetics of the neighborhood. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. The entire purpose of the ADA was to ensure accessibility, and yet these self-important busybodies were treating my sister's wheelchair ramp like it was some kind of a legal eyesore. One morning, I caught a group of HOA members standing across the street, whispering while staring at our house. I could practically hear the judgment dripping from their expressions. They were furious that we had dared to install something that didn't fit their perfect little mold of what a home should look like. And so, I did what any reasonable person would do. I attended the next HOA meeting to sort things out. The confrontation at the HOA meeting. The meeting was held in the neighborhood clubhouse, a place that reeked of fake smiles and passive-aggressive pettiness. At the head of the table sat Linda, the HOA president, a woman who clearly lived for the power her position gave her. She was the type of person who believed that she owned the neighborhood simply because she had appointed herself queen of the HOA. When my turn came to speak, I calmly explained that the ramp was a necessary medical accommodation, that it was perfectly legal, and that we had all the proper permits. Linda didn't even pretend to care. She simply tilted her head condescendingly and said, "Oh yes, that thing in front of your house. We can't allow that. It ruins the uniformity of the neighborhood." I clenched my fists under the table. "It's not just a thing, Linda. It's a wheelchair ramp. My sister needs it to get in and out of her home." She scoffed. Actually scoffed. "Well," she said with a smirk, "maybe she should have considered moving somewhere more suited for people like her." The room fell completely silent. Even some of the other HOA board members looked uncomfortable. I felt my blood boil. "Excuse me?" Linda sighed dramatically, acting as if this conversation was beneath her. "Listen, we have community standards to uphold. If we allow one person to build a ramp, then where does it stop? Next thing you know, people will be adding ugly metal railings, mismatched fences, or, God forbid, awnings." I could barely contain my rage. I pulled out the permits, legal documents, and state-mandated ADA compliance regulations that made it illegal to deny necessary accessibility structures. She barely glanced at them. "That doesn't matter," she said with fake sweetness, "because the HOA has its own rules." Then she leaned forward, smiling in that way that made my skin crawl. "If the ramp isn't removed within a week, we'll be forced to take matters into our own hands." The worst mistake of their lives. I left the meeting fuming, but I still foolishly believed that they were just bluffing. There was no way they would actually go through with such an illegal and cruel act, right? I was so wrong. A few days later, while I was at work, I got a frantic call from my sister. "They're here," she said, her voice shaking with fury and disbelief. "Who?" I asked, already grabbing my keys. "The HOA," she snapped. "They brought a bulldozer." I almost dropped my phone. I could hear loud crashing sounds in the background, the unmistakable crunch of wood and metal being destroyed. I jumped into my car and sped home like a madman. But by the time I arrived, it was too late. The destruction. The first thing I saw was the debris, shattered wood, twisted metal railings, and splintered concrete where my sister's perfectly legal wheelchair ramp used to be. Standing in the driveway were two construction workers, a bulldozer, and Linda herself, standing with her arms crossed, a satisfied smirk on her face. I saw red. "What the hell did you do?" I shouted, storming toward her. Linda didn't even flinch. She just smiled smugly and said, "You were warned. Consider this a lesson about following the rules." I looked at my sister. She was sitting in her wheelchair at the front door, stranded, unable to leave the house. Her hands were shaking, and tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I turned back to Linda. "You have no idea what you've just done." Linda laughed. "Oh, please. What are you going to do? Sue us?" I stepped closer, towering over her. "You don't get it, do you?" I said, my voice low and deadly calm. "My sister isn't just some random disabled woman. She's the governor of this state." Linda's smug smile froze. The other HOA members went pale. I took another step forward, holding back a satisfied smirk of my own. "You just bulldozed a sitting governor's wheelchair ramp. I'll let that sink in. And she's about to end you." Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no words came out. For the first time since I had met her, she looked genuinely afraid. And she damn well should be. Linda's smug expression vanished the moment I dropped the bombshell. The entire HOA board looked like they had just been hit by a truck. Their worst nightmare had just come true. They had just illegally destroyed a sitting governor's wheelchair ramp, a clear violation of both federal and state accessibility laws. And now they had to answer for it. But instead of accepting their fate, these entitled fools decided that their best move was to cover their tracks and silence us. What they didn't realize was that every single move they made only sealed their doom further. The HOA's desperate lies began. The very next day, my sister's office was flooded with emails and phone calls, not from reporters or state officials, but from panicked HOA board members desperately trying to get ahead of the fallout. I watched as she calmly put one screaming phone call on speaker. "Governor," the voice on the other end stammered. "This is Tom, the HOA treasurer. We wanted to apologize for yesterday's, misunderstanding." I crossed my arms and smirked. "A misunderstanding?" My sister's voice was icy cold. "A misunderstanding? My only way in and out of my home was bulldozed, Tom. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a lawsuit." There was a long silence on the line. Then Tom started begging. "Look, we didn't know you were." He cut himself off, realizing how stupid he sounded. We didn't realize the situation was, so complicated. We thought it was just an unapproved structure." My sister laughed coldly. "You thought you could bully a disabled woman out of her legal right to accessibility, and now that you realize you messed up, you think I'll just let it go?" Tom cleared his throat nervously. "Well, we were hoping to work something out, off the record." There it was, the cover-up attempt. I leaned in. "Are you seriously trying to bribe a state governor?" Tom panicked. "And no, of course not. We thought maybe we could make this right without lawyers getting involved." Too late. The HOA tries to bury the evidence. Within 24 hours, the HOA's entire tone shifted. They deleted their original violation notices from their records. They removed all mentions of the wheelchair ramp from HOA meeting notes. They even sent out a fake email to all residents, claiming that the destruction of the ramp had been a miscommunication and that they were working to resolve the issue. But what they didn't know was that I had already made copies of everything. Every email, every violation letter, every threat. I had them all backed up, printed, and ready to be used against them. And then they made their biggest mistake yet. The HOA finds us 4 unauthorized repairs. That afternoon, I walked outside to find another letter taped to our door. I laughed so hard I nearly fell over. The HOA had the absolute audacity to claim that if we rebuilt the wheelchair ramp, we would be fined $5,000 for unauthorized exterior modifications. These people were insane. I held up the letter to my sister, who shook her head in disbelief. "They really don't know when to stop," she muttered. I grinned. "Well, they're about to find out." My sister makes the first move. The next morning, my sister made one phone call. Not to an attorney, not to the media. She called the state attorney general's office. And within a few hours, the entire weight of the state government was crashing down on the HOA. The government gets involved, the HOA starts to crack. By noon, a formal legal inquiry had been launched against the HOA. By 2 p.m., state investigators were at Linda's house, asking her for statements and documentation. By 4 p.m., the ADA Compliance Commission had sent an investigator to inspect the damage to the ramp and file an official report. And by 6 p.m., the first news crew showed up. The HOA tries one last power move and fails miserably. Linda, still trying to cling to power, did what every narcissistic HOA dictator does when they start losing. She called an emergency HOA meeting. I attended, and oh boy, was it glorious. Linda tried to downplay everything, claiming that the ramp was removed for safety reasons and that it was never about discrimination. She even tried to gaslight the entire neighborhood, saying that the governor's ramp had never been officially approved in the first place. I let her talk. Then, when she was finished, I calmly stood up, reached into my bag, and pulled out a stack of documents. The ADA compliance paperwork that showed the ramp was legal. The permits that the HOA had claimed didn't exist. The emails proving that they had plotted to get rid of the ramp. The fraudulent fine notice. The copies of all the deleted HOA meeting notes. I walked up to the table and slammed them down in front of her. Linda's face turned completely white. The other board members were dead silent. Then my sister, the governor of the state, stood up and said, "Your reign is over." The room exploded into chaos. The HOA board begins to collapse. Within 48 hours, half the HOA board resigned in disgrace. By the end of the week, Linda was forced to step down. But we weren't done yet, because now we were going after every single one of them legally. The lawsuits begin, and the HOA's nightmare truly starts. The ADA Commission fined them $50,000 for accessibility violations. Multiple homeowners started filing legal complaints over HOA corruption. The HOA's insurance company dropped them, leaving them financially vulnerable. A class action lawsuit was forming, demanding full reimbursement for years of fraudulent HOA fines. And the best part? The governor's office had drafted a new bill, increasing the penalties for HOAs that violated accessibility laws. It would be signed into law within the year. Final score, Governor 10, HOA 0. Linda had tried everything, bulldozing the ramp, lying, covering up evidence, and even fining us for unauthorized repairs. But none of it worked. Now, she wasn't just dealing with angry homeowners. She was up against the state governor, multiple legal agencies, and a full-blown media firestorm. And we weren't done yet. We weren't just going to win. We were going to crush the HOA into the ground so badly that they would never recover. The lawsuits start, and the HOA board falls apart. Within 2 weeks, the lawsuits started rolling in. The ADA Commission hit the HOA with a $50,000 fine for illegally demolishing a state-mandated accessibility structure. The State Attorney General's office began a formal investigation into the HOA's fraudulent fines and financial misconduct. At least 10 homeowners filed lawsuits for various abuses, illegal fees, and selective rule enforcement. Linda was personally sued by my sister's legal team for emotional distress and discrimination. The pressure was too much. Within days, HOA board members started resigning left and right. One by one, they jumped ship, hoping to avoid personal liability. But it was too late. We had already named all of them in the lawsuits. By the time the dust settled, the HOA was left with no leadership, no funds, and no credibility. And that's when we delivered the final blow. Linda's world falls apart. I wish I could say that Linda fought to the bitter end, but the truth is, she crumbled fast. The moment she realized she was personally liable for the ADA violations, she panicked. She tried to claim ignorance, saying, "I didn't know it was illegal. I was just following the HOA rules." The ADA Commission laughed in her face. She then tried to settle out of court with my sister. My sister's response? "See you in court." Then, as if things couldn't get worse for her, reporters started digging into her past. And guess what they found? Multiple past HOA complaints against her for abusing her power. Evidence that she had pocketed HOA funds over the years. Leaked emails showing that she had orchestrated the attack on my sister's wheelchair ramp. The moment the news aired, the entire neighborhood turned against her. Within weeks, Linda was forced to sell her house and leave the neighborhood in disgrace. And when she tried to move into another HOA-controlled neighborhood, she was immediately rejected because no HOA wanted to take in someone who had destroyed their own community. She lost everything. The HOA is officially dissolved. With no leadership and mounting legal debt, the HOA was finished. At the final community meeting, my sister stood in front of hundreds of homeowners and made an announcement. The HOA has been officially dissolved. The entire room erupted into cheers. The remaining HOA funds were returned to the homeowners, and we replaced the corrupt HOA with a simple, non-invasive neighborhood management company, one that handled basic maintenance without making anyone's lives miserable. For the first time in years, people felt free in their own homes. The best part? The law changed because of this. The final cherry on top? Because of this entire ordeal, my sister worked with state legislators to pass a new law. Backhand index pointing right, the Homeowner Accessibility Protection Act backhand index pointing left. This law made it a felony for HOAs to deny accessibility structures to disabled homeowners. It increased the penalties for HOAs that tried to evade federal accessibility laws. It gave homeowners more legal tools to fight back against corrupt HOAs. And guess who personally signed the bill into law? That's right, Governor Badass, my sister. Final score, Governor 100, HOA 0. The neighborhood thrived without the HOA's tyranny. Linda vanished into obscurity. The lawsuits drained what little money the HOA had left. And best of all, my sister got her new wheelchair ramp rebuilt, bigger and better than before, with zero HOA interference. And every time I see it, I smile, because it's a monument to the fact that we stood our ground and won.